Okay.
You know what it's,
I'm sorry?
just let the record reflect that all the
Right, right, right.
special meeting are
Right.
correct.
Okay, if we could, I'd like to start the committee of the whole meeting. I would like to call to order the Oregon City Council Committee of the Whole meeting for March 27th, 2025. The time is 7:16. We don't have to do the national anthem and, or excuse me, the Pledge of Allegiance. This is a committee of the whole meeting and attendance is not required. However, please note that all council members are present aside from Mr. Drake. And everybody that was here for the special meeting is in attendance as well with the administration. So our first order of business is persons and delegations. And we have no one that signed up, so we'll move right into the agenda. The first item on the agenda for discussion is item 52 of 2025, being presented by Mayor Safarian and Building and Zoning Commissioner Mr. Schrake. Mr. Schrake.
Mr. President, this is amending Part 9 of Streets, Utilities, and Public Service Code for entitled Weeds, Grasses, and Other Vegetation in order to raise, or actually lower, the limit from 10 inches in grass height to 8 inches in grass height. And that is the only change in this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Schrake. Council,
Mr. President,
Ms. Ackerman.
I obviously wasn't here last week, but I did watch. Last week, you removed the section of proposed amendments that included 915.01 duty of property owner, and in 915.02 required maintenance, the proposed additional language was removed. 915.04 cutting by city billing assessment was removed from being discussed or potentially modified. After looking into how the nuisance mowing is billed, I have more questions than I have answers at this point. This has kind of been a can of worms that's been opened up, but I do appreciate, because in the long run, we'll get the language actually clarified for the public about these things. But I was curious, are we going to at any point revisit these, or does this have to go back to committee to then address those other potential amendments that we were previously discussing before it went down to just height change?
Mr. Schrake.
Mr. President, Ms. Ackerman, at this time, all we are addressing is the height of the grass. All of the other items were really just for clarification, but it seemed to have created more confusion than clarifying, so we've eliminated those and just left it in regards to the grass height maximum.
Okay, thank you.
Council. At this time, I might have, is this where we discuss lowering the height of the grass, Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President. And you could discuss it. You can't take any action on it till a council meeting, but that's why you have the committee holds to decide, you know, what you are going to do at the next meeting, because you'll have to come to a decision next regular council meeting, which would be the third reading. And so I'm not completely sure if we wouldn't have to amend to take those units out of the original ordinance that we first read, but we will know that by next week. Right now, they're not in here, but, and Steve, unless Melissa told you something else, I at one time heard that we would have to amend this to remove that because we originally read it with those in. So this, we'd have to move to remove all those, which has been done.
Would that be tonight or tomorrow?
No,
next
you
week?
can't take the action on
Okay,
committee of the
correct.
whole.
Okay.
So it would have to be, but to clarify once again, it would then take that minimum charge out of the equation and just go with our standard collection procedure that we've done for, I can't remember the year we actually enacted that.
2013.
And what,
2013 is when.
23, all right, so.
Thank you,
the
Mr. Roman.
2013 code, but
So, Mr. Mayor, with that being said, I don't know, the regular, or the other members of council are suggesting, but I think before we get to that meeting next week, we should have some kind of a consensus on what height we're going to require, and then readdress it again next week, instead of having a long, drawn-out meeting about 2 inches.
yes, so, yeah, you would, whatever made your comfort level to make a decision next week, whether you talk about it and decide this week, or talk about it and come up to a conclusion next week. Next week is delivery day.
Thank you. Council, any questions or any concerns, or Mr. Horniak?
Mr. President. Yeah, in regards, to the question or statement about discussing the height, I think at the committee meeting, and I don't recall the date, but I want to say it was 5 or 6 weeks ago, I thought we discussed that at length. Because we talked about 6, we talked about the existing 10, we talked about 8. We left it with, let's see what other communities around us are doing. Mr. Mazur, I think it was your recommendation coming back in the following council meeting, can't remember if it was committee or full council meeting, saying that the area communities pretty much were somewhat consistent with 8 inches, although there were some outliers in either direction. I thought we kind of agreed to adopt the 8 inches at that time. Certainly can be open for discussion. I'm saying I do know that we have kind of talked about this at great length, so certainly open to the discussion if you would like to pursue that, Mr. Reeves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hornick. I felt the same way when we left that meeting, but I've heard people talking about possibly 6 or just leaving it at 10. I'd like us to try to have a consensus, or at least a majority of people that are willing to, I'm good with the 8 inches, and I saw Mr. Wallensack shaking his head as well, that's what we had discussed. Is that okay with members of council?
Mr. President, the majority of
Yes.
people that I spoke with are more concerned about punitive action based on, following rain events that we've been subject to in the last few years. So as long as there's not a rush, I don't know if anybody that has an issue with the 8 versus 10. It's more so, will there be, a quick rush to judgment where we've got, and I know Mr. Roman has said, if there's standing water, or it's too wet, or you're gonna,
Correct.
they're gonna apply common sense to it. So as long as, I don't know, I wish we could have the language in there that says, in it, that would be taken into consideration. And, we're not gonna have neighbors running out and trying to, HOA each other over, when we've had
Mrs.
multiple
Ackerman?
inches of rain. So.
Correct. I know that Mr. Mazur and I have talked a lot, and there's a lot of administration discretion that they can, that they will definitely, if it's, one of those situations like that, I know they're not gonna go out and start punishing, or I don't even like using the word punish, but the punitive part of it. So, are we good with the 8 inches then? I think we have a consensus.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Pauloff?
either way, I am okay with the 8 inches, because then that way, when it does come to enforcement, by the time it actually gets cut, it'll be over 10. So I think that's the general consensus in itself. But, does it really matter with 10 or 8? The majority of people that I have talked to about this, they've already done it all along anyway. They've cut their grass and kept it up. And I do know those that have turned in neighbors because it's been over 15 inches tall. So, I agree on the 8, and that's where the ordinance lies.
Thank you. It looks like we have a majority. So, council, any other questions about item 52? Hearing none. Council, any additional questions? I will seek to move the motion of 52 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Can I have a motion, please?
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenczak.
Mr. President, I make a motion to move item number 52, 2025, to next week's regular meeting agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak.
Second?
Second by Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Wallenczak, second by Ms. Pauloff, to move item 52 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 52 is moved to next week's agenda. The next item on the agenda for discussion is item 62 of 2025, being presented by Mayor Safarian and Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien. Chief O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance will allow us to replace 10 MDTs, or the mobile data computers, for the apparatus. Those MDTs are set to be end of life at the end, in October 14th of 2025. That'll be at the time that our dispatch center no longer supports the Windows 10 versions. The current computers that we have in place will no longer take the Windows 11, just because of the compatible components. Working with our local vendor, or a local vendor, DR Ebel, that's who this will go to. And we were able to get it not only at state bid pricing, but an additional $700 off per unit. So that's what this ordinance will allow us to purchase these 10 MDTs. This project was budgeted for out of our 235 account for our capital improvement plan this year for 2025.
Thank you, Chief. Council. Council, any additional questions? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 62 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President?
Mrs. Pauloff.
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Pauloff.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. Thank you, Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Mrs. Pauloff, second by Mr. Salander, to move item 62 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 62 of 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. Our next item on the agenda for discussion is item 63 of 2025, being presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and our Public Service Director, Mr. Roman. Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is needed to amend an exhibit to an ordinance that passed in January of this year, January 13th. It was a ordinance to obtain right-of-way and actually sign a right-of-entry agreement with the owners of the Chipotle restaurant. The total cost of the right-of-way and the right-of-entry agreement was $5,420. That cost remains the same. However, part of the agreement for the right of entry was that we provide upfront compensation. And I think in the agreement, we inadvertently had $1 as that upfront amount, and it's really $3,000. That was the agreed upon amount. So the total cost doesn't change. It's just the upfront dollar amount was changing. So it's really the first 2 pages of Exhibit A needs to be amended. So otherwise, it's the same agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any additional questions? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 63 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I'll move to move item 63 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second?
Second by Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, a second by Ms. Pauloff to move item 63 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 63 of 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. Our next item on the agenda for discussion is item 64 of 2025, being presented by Mayor Safarian and Building and Zoning Commissioner, Mr. Stephen Schrake. Mr. Schrake.
Mr. President, this ordinance is essentially to align with the current codes adopted by the state of Ohio. This section has not been revised since 2006, and we have gone through a number of code cycle changes adopted by the state of Ohio, and this will just help realign our codes with that of the state.
Thank you, Mr. Schrake. Council, Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 64 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Pauloff?
so moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Pauloff. Second by Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Ms. Pauloff, second by Mr. Salander to move item 64 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 64 of 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. The next item on the agenda for discussion is item 65 of 2025, being presented by Mayor Safarian and Building and Zoning Commissioner, Mr. Stephen Schrake. Mr. Schrake.
Mr. President, thank you. This also is aligning the Oregon Municipal Code with the current codes adopted by the state of Ohio, entitled Ohio Building Code. And this is a three-part ordinance in which not only are we adding the code sections that should be adopted and enforced by, in accordance with the state of Ohio, but we would be rescinding the two chapters titled National Electric Code and Ohio Plumbing Code, as they will already be listed in the original ordinance, so they would become redundant. So we would then rescind those two and just carry one ordinance and one listing of the code sections and code types that are to be enforced by a certified building department of the state of Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Schrake. Council, any questions? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 65 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Pauloff?
so moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Pauloff.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Ms. Pauloff, second by Mr. Salander to move item 65 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 65 of 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. The next item on the agenda for discussion is item 66 of 2025, being presented by Mayor Safarian and City Administrator, Mr. Joel Major. Mr. Major.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance would allow us to enter into an agreement with the Oregon Economic Development Foundation to purchase the home at 4919 Corduroy Road, and the agreement is in your packets. This is one of the 5 houses on the north west corner of Corduroy and Wynn. And as you're aware, that is part of the proposed data center site. And per our agreement with Capacity LLC, it names in there that we will work towards acquiring these 5 homes on that corner. So also, we do have options to purchase those homes right now through the OEDF. This option is set to expire in early April, so the request for consideration here is to enter into this agreement so that we can fulfill those, execute the option, work towards closing and acquiring the property at the price that's listed in the agreement. So that's the very bland way of discussing this. It is, if you look at the pricing for the homes came about through appraisals. There was an incentive for the, there was an incentive for the homeowners when these appraisals were done. So some of this includes some moving expenses, closing costs, and the appraised value plus 25%. So with that, I'll take any questions unless, Mr. Mayor, do you have anything you want to add?
And, Mr. President?
Mr. Mayor.
And I do. This is one of 5. We expect to bring the other 4 in reasonably soon. It does a couple things. It was really hard for me to imagine what these folks, and some of them are here tonight, would go through with the uncertainty of what would happen in their homes. Did try to put myself in their place, and I found it would be somewhat disturbing to me, not knowing. And so with our confidence level raising to like 99% sure that this data center is going to happen, we feel it's the right thing to do to execute the other 4 in the next few weeks. So these people have some certainty themselves. And just, I know it's something Nick Roman, you know, goes, and you're allowed to shake your head this time. It makes him really comfortable. He gets very concerned when we're putting ourselves on the edge, budget-wise. But I will say that worst-case scenario, something happens, and this particular 99%, and I'm at 99%, but for Joel Mazer to be at 99% is an accomplishment, and he tells me he's there. But we also have a couple other options if it did fall through, where people are ready to purchase that site on the site. I mean, on the spur of the moment. That's how much in demand our site is right now. So we feel, even though it'll put a little stress on Nick, and he's learned to deal with it, and we will be coming forward with the other folks that there's options in the next few weeks. And with the Upterra group, it will make them feel more secure too, that we have complete control of that property what's that?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know we have a few.
What's that? If you have something to say, I would love to. Hallelujah.
I know we have a few of
Then
the citizens
I
here.
know, I can try to imagine what you folks go through, but I can't, but I did try. I'm getting there.
Like I said, we have a couple of citizens that are here that it directly affects. If you would like to speak, you're more than welcome to. I don't want you to feel like you have to come up. But if you would, come up if you have any questions. Oh, yeah, please. If you would, just give your name and address for the record.
Peggy Nickerson, 535 North Wind.
Okay?
I'm the last house on the end, so probably the last one to get my money, right?
No.
No?
No, I think if we do execute the next, they'll be executed. We'll do the rest of the 4 together.
Okay, so the guy in the end on Corduroy was he
Tim
the
Lannon.
first one to get in to actually sign the option? Is that why he went first? That's why I was wondering.
Say that again, I didn't hear it.
Okay, the guy that's, well, the address you pulled out tonight.
Yes,
Okay, he's the first house on, or last house on Corduroy of the 5. So I
he's
just
the
wondered-
only one that addresses on Corduroy. The other ones
Oh, gotcha.
are all Winroad.
Well, no, Carol is too.
Mr. Mayor,
Oh, the corner, Tim Lannon
Carol,
says, yeah,
Carol.
yeah.
She just left for Florida. She's really bummed she couldn't be here. So.
Yeah, all right. So now what was the question now?
I don't remember.
Mr. Mayor, she is asking, why is
Mr.
it
Horn.
in this order? Why is that
Yeah.
one?
I was-
Because
one.
when they were picking out when they were getting the options, theirs was the first to seek the option, and it went so many days after they signed it, so theirs is coming to expire sooner than yours is.
You said April. I thought ours had May on our paperwork.
I think yours is May,
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
all right.
Mr. Major?
but hers was April.
Yes, yes.
That's why. They put the dates on. Huh? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Well, and in the end, that's why we wanted to try to be fair, like to treat you.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. As long as it's going, that's all I need to know is that.
Yeah, and
going in.
I'm not telling you 100%, but like 99% sure you, in the next few weeks, or in the next few council meetings, which could be 1 or 2 weeks after there, 2 weeks after that, we expect to see
Okay.
the rest of yours before this council to do the same thing, to
Yeah, I
execute
had
them.
a question. The roundabout, what's going on with that?
You know, the roundabout wasn't to design it, it was to study the feasibility, if I'm not mistaken, right, Mr. Roman, of the practicality of of one of those existing at one of those sites we mentioned.
Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. No, we're just, and we just put out an ad to get qualification statements from area consultants to look at a potential of a roundabout at Wynn and Corduroy, at Wynn and Pickle, and at Wynn and Brown. But it's all very preliminary, and our goal is really to basically do a preliminary design and go after grant dollars is the plan, so.
It affects Carol more than any of us, so I just, in the corner, so.
But by the time that happens, she'll be out.
It'll be a while if we even got the grant dollars, so.
All righty, thank you.
Thank you. If there's nothing further, council, any questions or concerns? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 66 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move to send item 66 of 2025 to next week's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff, to move item 66 of 2025 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none. Item 66 of 2025 is moved to next week's agenda. With all of our items on the agenda being considered, we will now move to the mayor's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have I feel good about presenting this information to you. Our Architectural Design Committee has met with some of the plans from the Oregon Town Center and we're working to revise to enhance the aesthetics of the building proposed there. And we do expect construction to start sometime in April or May of this year. So long time coming, but we believe that project will turn out quite well.
Thank you. Mr. Roman, or Mr. Major, excuse me.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Major. Mr. Roman.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Horniak.
Just a brief report from my committee with Economic Development Foundation, in talking with Ms. Bennett, the director that was recently hired into that role. She has been busy and active, and she's already putting dates on my calendar as well as Mr. Mazur's calendar with area meetings and representations. I know she's been active meeting our business leaders in the community, and she's telling me she's going to try to reach out if she hasn't already, try to connect with everybody up here from council as well. So I believe she is starting off in quite the manner we thought we would. So I just want to report back on that. That's all I have, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Mrs. Pauloff.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Chief Began and Assistant Chief Spangler for the 2024 annual report. Really detailed, really great reading, actually. Very interesting. Thank you for the report. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Pauloff. Mr. Wallenczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak. Mrs. Ackerman.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Major, and maybe you can give me the sweet, short answer to this. I've had several people ask me when they're concerned about how many lumens when our streetlights are replaced, the brightness. Remind me, do we have options to, or we have to stick to one level lumen throughout the city? It's just one choice. We won't be able to give people options for lesser brightness?
Mr. Major.
Mr. President, Ms. Ackerman, we did pick the lumens that are the lowest for reasons of that. I think actually it came from Rodney's recommendation, but I agree with it wholeheartedly. All of the lights, we went with the lower lumens, but that was, from my experience, when you change lights out, especially in neighborhoods, you get phone calls.
Yeah.
And people don't like them.
am.
Yeah, right. So that is a thing, and that is very common. So we did go with the lowest for all of them.
That's good.
So if there are any specific requests for anybody that wants them brighter for whatever reason.
Haven't heard brighter, no.
Okay,
Heard that.
all right, but that's where, just, we got to know that, but we did go with the lower lumen lights.
Okay, and the second question, I might as well just ask you, is that I've had people tell me that when they travel, some cities have a different color of white at intersections to indicate to people when they're driving that there's one coming up. I'm just asking if that's a possibility we could look at. I see Mr. Roman shaking his head, and so, I mean, they do it in some cities, and they find that it helps drivers to know that there's an intersection coming up. But personally, I don't know if I think it would look a little hodgepodgey, but you
Mr.
know.
President, Ms.
Yes.
Ackerman, will inquire from
Okay.
First
Just-
Energy, but a lot of this is driven by them.
Okay,
They give you a very limited list of options, very, very limited, very few options. So if we have to do something, if there's something like that, there would be an additional cost, and we'd have to make sure that that option's available. And if it's not, then we have to see if we can make exceptions too. So,
just,
because we
it
buy
was
the
a safety
lights,
thing.
we buy the lights,
Mhm.
but then they have to maintain them. So that's why they're they have them as very limited There's a method behind the madness. They have to maintain them. So if they're carrying, a larger assortment of lights, they have to have those in their inventory. And if they have a larger inventory, they have more storage, they have to coordinate which lights need to be changed out over all of northern Ohio is their territory,
But
so.
it is done in some cities, so I maybe
It is.
have to look more at the effectiveness of it than, the novelty. So, okay, thank you for
Yep.
that. And
We'll look into it.
the last thing is there is a tree commission meeting, I believe tomorrow at 4 in the community room. Everyone is always welcome and excited about putting trees in places other than just in the, like town center area or the developing areas, but getting them into people's yards and trying to build up our tree canopy. So what is this? No. We won't force a tree on you. It's only for people that want trees. But thank you, but that's it. Thank
Trees
you. And
have
I do
branches.
apologize for creating the problem last week with, I had, last year when Mr. Horniak was president, I would just tell Cassie, send her an email, and I actually was considering flying home for the meeting and returning to our family vacation, and it was, Paul Drake said, you're with your family comes first, and I agree, but I'm sorry for the, the inconveniences of all of it, for all of you, so my apologies.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackerman. Is that the remainder of your report?
Yes, thank you,
Thank
sir,
you.
that's it.
Mr. Salander?
Mark it down. No report. Thank you.
Wait a minute. I told my wife it was gonna be a longer meeting. Now you're gonna be getting home earlier. Thank you, Mr. Salander. I have nothing from my standing committee. It's just, I read yesterday where there's a citizen that's saying that they're upset with us as a council and administration because of Dairy Queen going right across the street from Dairy Depot. We don't have a say where it goes. I mean, that's why wherever you see like a McDonald's, you see a Burger King or a Wendy's and that, it's, so people have choices. That's why they do that. So I just wanted to put that out there, so if somebody's listening to the meeting or wants to go back and hear these things, we don't have a say of where they come in and go. That's a pure choice of the company that is coming into our city.
Mr. President,
Mr. Mayor.
I'd just like to expand on that a little bit. Actually, it's the pure choice of the zoning that happened to exist over there. So anybody is allowed to perform any task that is permitted with the zoning that is currently existing on that parcel, which it did exist there. So not only did council or the administration not have anything to say about it, but if we would have, they would have simply won some fairly handsome legal settlement, so the city would have been end up paying for their building versus themselves, so, yeah, they have their rights.
Yes, thank you. So,
Mr. President? I
Ms.
just-
Ackerman.
Could we clarify, like, since you got on that subject, there were a lot of people that said, hey, weren't they gonna be down at the old Wendy's on the south side at the Kmart property? There was a sign up there for a long time that said DQ, so I think that's why people are like, well, how did they come to being there, then moving down to the east to be, where they are now? So I think that raised questions in people's minds.
I
of how that
believe-
came about.
I do know why that happened that way, because the cost of the building where they originally were, where the Culvers went, was like more than 3 times the cost of where they bought there, and they just figured it was too costly for their investment there. So that's why they moved down the street.
Thank you.
And just, no, I'm gonna let it go. Thank you. If there is no further business before council, I will seek a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President.
Mr. Horniak,
So,
thank you. Oh,
wrong
I'm sorry.
Steve.
Steve. Mr.
So-
Salander,
so
then
moved.
Steve will